Welcome to the NYU Arthur Carter Institute of Journalism. I'm Azadeh Moaveni. I'm associate professor here, and I run our program in global journalism. This event is a wonderful collaboration, however, amongst many like-minded groups. So we are co-organizing with the Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies, the Adalah Justice Center, and we are also co-sponsored by the Jewish Voice for Peace, at the Department of Social and Cultural Analysis at NYU, and some others. Just a few little points. Wonderful to see such a big crowd. Please make sure your phones are off. The restrooms are at the back. We will be stopping for questions at around 6:20. We are recording, so this will be available later for those who couldn't make it. So when you have a question, please wait for the microphone to come around so that you're recorded for the recording. There are books here on sale in the back, and Nathan will be signing after the talk, so should you like to acquire a book, you can do that with his signature. I'm really delighted to be able to host this. I'm going to introduce Amy, who will then introduce Nathan, who is also my former colleague at Crisis Group. So not only am I a great admirer of his work and analysis, but had the good fortune to work with him briefly at our hardworking peace-seeking organization. It is really my sincere pleasure, though, to welcome and introduce Amy Goodman, who will be leading this conversation with Nathan. Unfortunately, Abed Salama is unwell and can't join us this evening. Amy, for those of you who don't already know, is one of the leading figures in this country, pursuing the sort of non-corporate journalism that is essential to the Fourth Estate's theoretical primary function, which is holding power and government to account. She is the host and executive producer of Democracy Now!, which is a daily national independent news program that airs on hundreds of public TV and radio stations around the country. Her investigative career is extraordinary, and it spans coverage of East Timor's independence movement and the role of Chevron, the oil corporation, in environmental degradation and violence against activists in Nigeria. That is remarkable work. She is more widely recognized than almost anyone I know in this sphere for her work. She's been awarded numerous medals and prizes for advancing genuinely grassroots journalism. She's the author of many books, but most recently of Democracy Now!, a book that chronicles 20 years of her reporting for that outlet on leaders and movements that have reshaped the world. So I will pass this to Amy, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Well, it's such an honor to be here. I don't know how many of you got to watch or listen to or read Democracy Now! This morning, but we spent the show with Nathan Thrall and Abed Salama. I'm so sorry he can't be here, but I can't think of a better person to represent him. This is a remarkable work, A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy. And I hope each and every one of you get this book, get several of the books if there are enough. I just wanted to read what Arundhati Roy, one of my heroines, said about this book. Nathan Thrall's book made me walk a lot. I found myself pacing around between chapters, paragraphs, and sometimes even sentences just in order to absorb the brutality, the pathos, the steely tenderness, and the sheer spectacle of the cunning and complex ways in which a state can hammer down a people and yet earn the applause and adulation of the civilized world for its actions. It has been hailed as a masterpiece, an epic work, and today we're going to talk about this work. Now, I was going to say it comes out of, something like a 50-page article you wrote for the New York Review of Books, but it is also entirely different. That article that got passed around by everyone from At the time when he was alive, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, Michelle Alexander, the former Speaker of the Israeli Knesset, Avraham Berg, the former Palestinian negotiator, Hanan Ashrawi, got tremendous attention. But what Nathan does with this book will, I believe, touch people across the political spectrum, not only in Israel. I mean, in the occupied Palestinian territories, people know what this is about. But your writing alone is so magnificent in what you captured in this kind of, I would say, collaboration with Abed. And I'd like to start off by asking you about why you chose this school bus crash that killed a number of little children, including Abed's 5-year-old boy, Milad, to show us, as you describe it, the architecture of separation, the geography of pain.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you for appearing here with me, and thank you all for coming. You know, I feel that all too often there is a focus in the coverage of Israel-Palestine on an invasion into Jenin, a particular episode of violence, the Israeli military coming and bulldozing a home, you know, and the feeling that I have looking at that coverage is that it misses the fact that those things are happening actually when the system isn't working. The system is working to keep people in check and to keep them oppressed and to keep them from moving at all times. And it's the Israeli military coming and having to destroy a home is something that they resort to only when the ordinary system, the invisible system of bureaucracy and permits and walls and fences and segregated roads and you know, different laws applied to a Palestinian or a Jew who commit the same crime on the same street. And so in order to get at that, I felt that it was necessary not to choose some kind of event like an invasion or a bombing, but to take something that happens all over the world, a car accident, and to show what it means for that to take place in this location with these particular victims who are, because of their identity, and because of the place in which it took place, right outside of Jerusalem, right out on the other side of a wall, and because of the inherent drama of that incident and the tragedy of it, I was able to delve deeply into the specific decisions and obstacles that all of these different parents and children and teachers and others faced when the crash took place. And by doing that, I felt that it was a way to show what the actual system is that we all miss.
So why don't you tell us the story? Now, this was a school bus crash of little children that took place more than a decade ago in 2012. Tell us where it happened. Tell us how Milad was preparing, his parents not actually wanting him to go, but how he ended up on this bus.
Yeah. So it was February 2012, and there was a terrible storm. And there was a field trip for a kindergarten class of young Palestinian children who live in an enclave, a walled ghetto that has the town of Anata within it, as well as the Shuafat refugee camp. And part of this walled ghetto is officially annexed by Israel and is considered by Israel to be within the sovereign state of Israel, and part of it is unannexed, but it's all one big ghetto of neglect. And as a result of the Israeli policy of annexing part of the area, some of the parents had green IDs and some had blue IDs. Some were able to cross a checkpoint to enter Jerusalem, others were not. And these children went on a long journey around this wall toward the edge of Ramallah to go to a play area, because the school was filled with kids who had green IDs and kids who had blue IDs, and so they couldn't just go to a much closer play area on the other side of the wall in a Jewish settlement, Pisgat Ze'ev. On that morning, Abed was actually still asleep when his son left. The night before, he had bought him treats for the trip. He was very excited for it. And after crossing a checkpoint on the way, following the snaking route of this wall, they were struck by a semi-trailer that was going back and forth to a settlement quarry, and veered across into opposing traffic and slammed into this bus. And the bus flipped over and it caught on fire, and 6 children and 1 teacher died. And because it took place on an Israeli road in Area C, within the West Bank, an Israeli patrolled road where Israeli police are responsible and give out traffic tickets, but a road that settlers really do not use. It was originally built as a bypass road for settlers, and then later, because different infrastructure was built for them, this became a road for Palestinians to use. And so because it wasn't really used by settlers, it was totally ignored by Israel, as this whole kind of area in which it took place it is an area of utter neglect. And the Palestinian Authority is not allowed to go there, and the Israeli emergency services came extremely late to the accident site, such that all of the kids had been evacuated by bystanders who came and just drove these kids off in their own private vehicles. Some who had blue IDs and could enter Jerusalem went to the better hospitals in Jerusalem. Those who had green IDs went in a different direction, and mostly to Ramallah. What I do in the book is I tell the story of many different characters who are affected by this accident. Parents who learn of the crash, rush to the scene, try and discover where their children are. Abed himself came to the site of the crash and was told many rumors about where all the children were, and didn't know even which hospital to go to. He couldn't have gone to a Jerusalem hospital.
Wasn't he told that he shouldn't worry because his child was on a second bus?
That's right. Later, when he went to the Ramallah hospital, his whole ordeal lasted, over 24 hours before he finally found his son's fate. And there were other parents whose story I tell in the book, as well as some of the teachers, and a man who heroically rescued dozens of children from the bus, went in with a teacher into a burning bus and pulled out dozens of children, and nearly lost his mind over what he saw.
This is Arik.
His name is Salim.
Tell us about him.
Yeah, so Salim lives right next to the accident site in a dense urban area called Aram, right on the other side of the wall. And he was on his way to work that morning. He has a shop where he fixes car tires right next to the checkpoint of Hizma. And he was on his way there, and he saw the bus on fire. He pulled over and ran toward it, and broke open the back window of the bus and climbed in and started pulling kids out. And by the time he was done pulling the kids out, he was destroyed and extremely angry. And he was yelling at any official that he saw, whether Palestinian or Israeli, when they finally did come, and started to blame them and scream at them for coming so very late to this accident site, and telling the Israelis, if a child had been throwing a stone on this street, you would have been here in 2 minutes. And the Israeli soldiers beat him after he had rescued all these kids. He spent 10 days in the hospital. And so the book attempts to weave together both the day of the crash and the story of what happened through these different characters with the whole history of Israel-Palestine.
Tell us about Java Road for those who aren't familiar. Tell us about that history through this accident.
Yeah. Java Road, which is where the accident took place, was originally built as a bypass road for settlers. There are many such bypass roads, and the main idea of them is to give settlers the illusion that there are no real Palestinians around them, that they're passing from Tel Aviv or Jerusalem to their settlement, and it's seamless. They're just on a highway, and there are these communities that you can basically ignore because there's no off-ramp or on-ramp to them. You're just cutting right through them on these highways. And when more of this infrastructure was built, the Jabba Road turned into a road for Palestinians, a very small road that is the single way to go from the Ramallah area to the southern half of the West Bank. And you're kind of going in a bit of a circle around Jerusalem because Palestinians can't enter Jerusalem, including East Jerusalem, which is a part of the West Bank. And Jabba Road, it was designated Area C, the 60% of the West Bank that is under full Israeli control and full Israeli responsibility. And the fact that the accident took place on this road meant that the Palestinian police, for example, were not supposed to even come there, and they did without permission initially.
So if you can talk about why your article, where you started, though this book so far expands it, got so much attention in Israel and Palestine, the response to it, if you can describe that. I think it's a little too early to tell the response to this book because it was just published this week. You know, for me, that there was a lot of attention for the article was affirmation of the wisdom of the approach of focusing on narrative, because I had written a lot of analysis over the years, and none of it had that kind of an impact. And I think that there is an exhaustion with the analysis of Israel-Palestine. There's an exhaustion with Israel-Palestine in general. And what the article, the response to the article taught me is that I need to go even further in that direction and to focus entirely on narrative, where the article is, despite having narrative, it's still, the majority of it is historical analysis. And so this book
unlike the article, is purely narrative. It's told only through the lives and family histories of the different characters.
Now, when we did the interview on Democracy Now!, Abed was there, and again, I'm really sorry that he's not feeling well. Aside from selfishly, I wanted to meet him. But he talked about what it meant to be interviewed by you for hour after hour. His original reason to agree to it was just it would bring Milad back to life. Anytime he saw you, he would be talking about his little boy. But talk about the process you went through with him. First of all, him even agreeing, to reveal so much about his life in this very close-knit community where still there are many secrets.
Yes. I spent more time with Abed than with any other character in this book, and he put incredible trust in me. But as you say, the main motivation for him was to speak about something that no one wanted to speak about. And I found that with many of the characters in this book, that many of the families, there was a cloud of silence around the accident. And I sat with a number of different families where people said this was the first time that we're discussing it since weeks after it occurred. Everybody's afraid to upset the bereaved and to bring up this subject, and so they're silent. But many of the parents were yearning to talk about it. And Abed said that by talking about it, he felt that he was that Milad was present with us as we spoke. And, he also told me that when he finished the book, he didn't want to finish the book because he felt as though he was burying Milad again, that it was ending, that he had brought him back to life by speaking with me and by having this book exist, and that when he finished it, he felt like it was a second burial. But the process with many families was one of just a flood of emotion coming because people hadn't spoken.
And what surprised you most as you went on this journey? Talk about the period of time you took in interviewing so many people, also Abed's wife and the extended family.
Yeah. I did, I don't even know how many, over 1,000 hours of interviews. What struck me most was how even with people in the book who didn't lose a child or who weren't parents of the kids on the bus, the theme that kept coming up was how much pain there is just below the surface, and the degree to which this state, the jaws of this state, invade every aspect of people's lives. And so there were stories that I told that illustrated that, including Abed's own life at one point marrying a woman just in order to keep his job, in the hope of himself getting a blue ID and being able to enter Jerusalem and keep his job. Something that's not in the book, but another illustration of the same point. There's an economist who showed that when Israel changed its rules for the age at which a young man who's married can get a permit to work inside Israel, when that was reduced, the age of average marriage in the West Bank went down. So here is a state with its levers changing the most intimate details of people's lives.
And the waiting, the constant waiting.
Yes.
it invades every part of Abed looking for his son, for what has happened to his son, the information. But the waiting, it's hard to put that word together with violence and the more overt violence that takes place there. Talk about that, the bureaucratic absolute control over people's lives.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, one of the resources that's stolen is time. It's not just a theft of land or childhoods or children who are taken for throwing stones. It's the theft of time. It is, every morning going on some 45-minute route for what should be a 5-minute drive. It's standing for hours at a checkpoint. It's not being able on this morning to go to a hospital where you're told your son is, and then waiting to hear about different kinds of bureaucratic decisions that may be made about giving a temporary permission for parents to enter. The feeling of helplessness in front of this bureaucracy is absolutely pervasive.
I want to open up this discussion, but still continue to ask you questions. But there are so many people who know so much about what's happening there, are from Palestine. I see Professor Rashid Khalidi and Mona Khalidi here, and so many of you, if you want to share your own experiences or have questions for Nathan, as his book has been published this week. And let me ask you, Nathan, where are you going? Where are you speaking along with Abed? Hopefully he will get better soon.
Tomorrow we're going to speak at the Palestinian American Community Center in Clifton, New Jersey. And Sunday we leave for a week in the UK. We'll go to Oxford and be in London.
Is this Abed's first time out of Palestine?
Not out of Palestine, but his first time. It'll be his first time in the UK, and it's his first time in the US.
By the way, on the show he talked about, and I was very touched by this because I myself have a little puppy, he was most struck by people walking their dogs. Just the pleasure of walking down the street. He keeps his dog on the roof, terrified because it's so crowded where he lives that if he brings his pit bull down, he might bite someone because it's just so crowded. It's those details that are just crushing. Yeah. And if you'd like to share your own, if you'd like to even identify yourself.
Hi, Razia Iqbal. I rather happily have read this book, and it is spectacular, so congratulations. Thank you very much for writing it. One of the things that really struck me about it, I've got lots of questions about the kind of politics, but I'm going to confine myself to the thing that struck me the most, which is the genre that you chose, because it seems to me that there were so many elements of this book that were novelistic. And I wondered why you didn't write a novel, partly because when I read fiction, I feel that the single thing it does is allow me into the heads of the people that I'm reading about. And a few times you've used the word characters as opposed to people. And I feel you must have been informed by the form of the novel. And in a way, I wonder whether this is exactly the kind of book that should be pressed into the hands of Israelis in order for them to stand in the shoes of people through that lens of it being novelistic.
Thank you. I'm honored. I very much had the ambition that the book would put people in the shoes of these people. That is the overarching goal of the whole thing. It's very simple. For years I was working as an analyst, and I would, judge other analysts. Oh, how novel is this argument? We've heard this 1,000 times. This is so banal. And here I'm doing the most banal thing in the world. I'm just trying to make people see the reality, to just be in these people's shoes. And part of the reason for that is that I feel totally fed up with all of the discussion of Israel-Palestine. That's all in abstractions. 2 states and 1 state and confederation, and don't we need to all debate what this hypothetical future ought to be? All of that conversation is a distraction from the present. It's a distraction from mothers who have their children taken from them at 1:30 in the morning by Israeli soldiers who say that they threw stones at the occupying force, and not knowing where their children are, not even being able to find the prison where their children are located. That's going on every day. And by having these other conversations about 2 states and 1 state and what have you, we're not focused on the present. And I think that everyone who goes to the West Bank and sees it with their own eyes sees that it's a moral catastrophe. It's undeniable. And I've seen many people who have, of all different kinds of political persuasions, who are changed just by seeing it with their own eyes. And the goal of this book is to do that. Show people what it is. And the only way to do that was to do something that aspired to give you a feeling of it being somewhat novelistic.
Can I just be really cheeky and ask one more question? I mean, you talk about wanting to change the way in which people see this. I wonder to what extent your immersion in this story, not just the article, but writing the book, transformed you, given how much you have been immersed in the subject for so long, in wearing different hats.
Definitely, I was changed before starting, in having made the decision that this is the right approach, and that it's a waste of time to talk to policymakers and to be trying to make change from the top down. I feel that there needs to be a just radical shift in public opinion. It needs to come from the ground up, and that is only going to come from something that from people seeing with their own eyes. And the general public's not all going to travel to the West Bank, so hopefully they can watch movies and hear stories and read books. And so, yes, there was a change, a philosophical change that happened that changed my career and what I wanted to do with it, that preceded the book. But the actual reporting changed me just on an emotional level. I would come home and relay the stories that I heard, and would weep myself as I told them to my wife, who would be weeping listening to them.
Is it translated into Arabic and Hebrew?
Not yet. Not yet. I hope it will be.
Nobody else does first. Hi, Nathan. Thank you very much. Omar Shahabi from the law school here. I want to read you, and I think it's fitting since we have the Edward Said Chair of Arab Studies from Columbia, that I just read a little, sorry, to embarrass you.
Rashid, you're going to have to make a comment also.
This is from something that Edward Said wrote in the New York Times in the early 80s. The PLO is non-Western. It has relations with the Soviet Union. It is Islamic, disliked by Henry Kissinger, and most of its members do not speak English. These are serious charges, especially when the PLO is compared with Israel. I fully share with you your belief, and I know you from the days of officialdom in Palestine. I share your belief in the bankruptcy of the policymakers, the political process, all of that. But I am somewhat skeptical that in the West there's any more goodwill towards the Palestinian as a people. and I speak as a Palestinian, of course, right? But this is my sense, that there's not a whole lot of goodwill towards us as a people, even removed from our leadership, or what passes for leadership. Convince me otherwise, that's the case. Do these charges against the PLO not apply to us as Palestinians in the Western perception?
So I am overall quite pessimistic about seeing change in my lifetime. And I write in the acknowledgments that I wrote it in the hope that it'll change in my children's lifetime. So I don't want to overstate, this book or this cultural product is going to be the answer. But it's an incremental thing, and I do think that there is a change in public opinion here, in the U.S. and the West generally, and I believe that it will continue in that direction. But again, it's a very long road. I don't want to oversell it.
Hey, thank you so much. My name is Rim Khamis. I'm Palestinian. I'm very glad to be here. Your book reminds me with a book that I read a long time ago, that Sweet Heart After. I read it in a book club that I am part of, and it impacted me immensely. So I'm now very excited to read this one, knowing that it's based on a real story makes it even more heartbreaking, I'm sure. I want to ask you about the strength that you've seen in the Palestinian people from your book. I still didn't read it, so I just want to hear from your perspective. A lot of that is written about Palestinians, usually presents us as one whole group, and many times focuses on, being the reality, which is being occupied under terror. But also we have a lot of strength as a community. And I would love to hear from you, from your interviews and from your experience, the strength that we have in spite of all these miseries and in spite of everything that is working against us.
Thank you very much for your question. The Sweet Hereafter by Russell Banks is one of my all-time favorite books. It was actually recommended to me after I was already pretty much done with this one, and somebody said to me, "Oh, you must have read The Sweet Hereafter. It's about a school bus that crashes in upstate New York, and it's about the town and how it's affected by it and told through multiple perspectives." Sounds a lot like what you're doing. And I had never read a book by Russell Banks, and I became a huge, huge fan. And I've read a bunch of Russell Banks's novels since then. The resilience of the people in this book, not all of them, but many of the people in this book, is one of the themes that comes through, I hope, throughout, and even the most incomprehensible suffering of one particular mother in this book is eventually met with a kind of resilience that I found incredibly inspiring, and all of it, just the fact that people have not given up in the face of these odds, in the face of this power differential, is awe-inspiring.
Nathan, after someone else asks a question, I'd like you to read a little from your book, and you can choose what you'd like to read. But if someone else has a question, I'd also like to ask you about these massive protests, some of the biggest protests in Israel in decades, and what it means for Palestinians in the United States, referred to as pro-democracy protests, hundreds of thousands of Israelis out in the streets.
it may not surprise you to hear that I question the entire premise of these protests as being about democracy. Those in favor and those who are against are both saying it's about either the destruction or the preservation of Israeli democracy. But, as the simple example of the characters in this book show, you have in this book Abed living in the town of Anata, and you have several characters living in the settlement of Anatot on Anata's lands. And the ones in the settlement of Anatot, they're both under the state of Israel, they're both under Israeli control, they both have the Israeli High Court of Justice, the center of these protests, as the court of last resort. And one of them has basic civil rights, one of them has none. And when the people of Anatot vote, they are not casting absentee ballots. When they travel to and from their workplaces and to and from their settlements in the West Bank, they're not crossing an international boundary and showing their passports. And so a state that has within it millions of people who do not have basic civil rights on the basis of their ethnicity or national origin or religion is not one that you could call a democracy under any definition of democracy that I know.
And the visa system that the U.S. is now instituting?
Yeah, I have an op-ed on the visa waiver program coming out tomorrow.
Where?
In the Times, in the New York Times. Yeah, I mean, the visa waiver program, the U.S. law says that there has to be reciprocity. And the understanding was that, so the visa waiver program allows Israelis to come now to the United States without applying for a visa. It's a huge boon to the Israeli government and to ordinary Israelis who don't have to go through the hassle of applying for visas anymore. And the basic criterion, the most fundamental aspect that they had, there are many small bureaucratic steps that they had to take, but the most basic one was every U.S. citizen had to be treated equally by the state of Israel, just as the United States, in reciprocity, treats every Israeli the same. And that criterion is not met. And it's obvious that it's not met, and it's so not met that even a group...
Explain how it's not met.
Yeah, even a group of very mainstream U.S. senators, issued a joint letter saying flatly, this has not been met. Palestinian Americans are still discriminated against within this system. 40% of Palestinians under occupation live in Gaza. And any Israeli American who comes into Ben Gurion Airport can go and visit his relative wherever he wants, as much as he wants. In a settlement, not in a settlement, it doesn't matter. A Palestinian American, and again, 40% of the Palestinians under occupation live in Gaza. A Palestinian American who might have a relative in Gaza can't go see that relative unless it's a first-degree relative, no grandchildren, no grandparents and grandchildren. And then if it's a first-degree relative, you can only apply for permission to visit them no more than once per year. And the Palestinian Americans cannot, go through the checkpoints with their cars. They have to go through a separate pedestrian-only crossing, and they could, if they got a settler to drive their car, they could ride as a passenger and go through it. It's just countless ways in which Palestinian Americans are discriminated against within by Israel, despite Israel having been admitted to this program.
So who made the decision?
Well, I mean, ultimately Biden, yeah. And apparently, according to the reporting, you know, the previous ambassador, Tom Nides, who was appointed by Biden, this was his, you know, pet project, and he was so proud to make this, to give this gift to Israel.
Thank you. I'm permitting myself a question too. Thank you. Nathan, you spoke about shifting out of the world of policy because you felt that the discussion and the analytical policy sort of whirlwind wasn't moving public sentiment along. Can you talk a little bit about how your focus on shifting to narrative and storytelling as a way to shift public opinion, whether you feel that the space in the media, I'm going to get this as a journalism question because of where we are, where do you think the media has come, specifically the American mainstream media, in the last 20 years when it comes to coverage of Israel and Palestine? Because I remember when I started out as a journalist, it was devastating to have to work on those stories and to participate in what was very dehumanizing coverage of Palestinians in the New York Times, in Time Magazine where I worked, in all of the what we call legacy media now. It was a bad time. It's come a long way, but how do you assess how far it's come, where are the challenges still? Because in the end, the storytelling has to land in the media that the most people read and watch. So where have we ended up with a receptiveness to a different kind of political analysis and a more humanizing treatment? Like, where is the space for the stories that you are shifting to tell?
Thank you. So the situation, I do think, is better than it was just even in the last decade. It's changed. But there is a very, very long way to go. I mean, as somebody, you know, some Palestinians who met me over the years in the US would say to me, thank you not so much for what you wrote, but where you wrote it. Thank you for getting those things in X, Y, and Z. And I can tell you that getting those things in X, Y, and Z, certainly part of it was that I'm an American Jew, and they wouldn't have run with a Palestinian writing them. And part of it was a very painful struggle where I wanted to pound my head against the wall fighting with the editors and the fact checkers, and sometimes, you know, it's so deep that they don't even know their own biases, that still exists in a very strong way.
I'm passing it to
Rashid Khadi, I just want to comment on something. I agree completely with what you said. The mainstream media has gotten marginally better. There's no question. I'm not talking about you for Democracy Now!, obviously. I'm talking about the mainstream media. That is where, quote unquote, most people get their news. But most people of a certain age get their news. And I teach 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. And I can tell you, they do not get their news from the mainstream media. They don't know the mainstream media. They pay no attention to it. They see stuff on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok and God knows what else. And that's all they know. And they know much more than anybody who reads or sees the mainstream media. Much, much, much more. Now it's a self-selecting sample, maybe, what I'm seeing. But there's no question but that young people are far better informed than their elders by, you know, hundreds of miles, because they do not depend on the mainstream media. So the mainstream media has improved, there's no question, that much. I mean, I still get the most idiotic, biased, bigoted questions from fact checkers and editors that I'm sure nobody else who writes on equally controversial topics gets, and I'm sure you do too. In fact, I think you just got it from the New York Times. And I shouldn't talk because I do get occasionally published by the mainstream media. But it's not there that people under 30 most of whom unfortunately maybe don't vote, most of whom are not considered, most people. But they are a growing number, and that's one reason things are really changing here in this country. Not because the mainstream media have changed or 20 senators finally woke up and realized this is rank discrimination. God bless them. I mean, that is a change, folks. We never had one senator or two senators who said anything about anything. The 20 Democratic senators said what they said, and this is an enormously important change. It doesn't mean that anything is going to change on the macro level. Nevertheless, that's not where the hope is, and I'm very optimistic because the younger people I see are light years ahead of their elders, light years ahead of their elders, and that's thanks to the fact that they, fortunately, do not depend on the mainstream media. I'm sorry, I'm speaking in the Arthur L. Carter NYU Journalism Institute.
Do you think
we promote that.
The killing of Shireen Abu Akleh changed people?
I would say that it had an effect, but it doesn't feel to me like it was. It was an event, a powerful, example. But I don't think that there's been, you could say some substantial shift. I mean, there is a very prominent senator who's considered a mainstream senator, Chris Van Hollen, who has taken the lead on pushing for an investigation and for publishing what has been investigated on the killing of Shireen, and he's superb. And so I see it as evidence that there has been some shift, but I wouldn't say that Shireen, everything's different now.
Would you read something from your book?
Sure. This is just a short passage about a mother named Nancy who has two children. One is named Salah, and the other is a girl, a younger sister named Sadine. 40 days before the accident, Salah had told Nancy that he was going to die. "I'm going to heaven, and Sadine will be an only child," he said. Nancy responded that he was very young and had a long life ahead of him, but he repeated it nearly every day, torturing his mother. She was so worried that she brought Salah and Sadine to sleep with her, telling him that she wanted to keep them warm in the winter cold. Salah had turned 5 in December. He had a party at home and another at his grandmother's, but he wanted to celebrate at school. The party kept being postponed. Every week it was someone else's birthday. Then the celebration was set for Thursday, February 16th, until the class trip was rescheduled for that date. Nancy said that he would have his party a few days later. "I won't have time, he screamed at her. "Either we have the party before, or there will be no party." His mother caved, arranging the celebration for the week prior to the trip. He asked his grandmother to come from Autour. That day, she took him shopping for another birthday present. He passed by all the toys in the store and selected a red and blue backpack with his favorite superhero on it, Spider-Man. The parents had to sign a permission slip for the class trip to Kids Land. Azam is the father. Azam refused to sign because the weather was very bad on the Friday before. Salah was devastated. He cried and begged, saying that he had to be there with his friends. He kept nagging Nancy to sign, and she finally relented on Tuesday morning with just 2 days to go. At his grandmother's that afternoon, Salah ate za'atar flatbread, which he had asked her to make specifically before the outing. "Why before? I'll make it after," she had said. "No," he insisted. "It has to be before." That night, Nancy bathed him, dressed him in his Spider-Man pajamas, and combed his thick black hair. As he went to sleep, he hugged her and again said he was going to heaven, leaving her alone with one daughter. Nancy felt like she was being driven crazy. "Why are you doing this to me?" she said. The following night, on the eve of the trip, Salah's father got home late. Salah had kept calling him from Nancy's phone, pestering him to come home. He wanted to go and buy treats for the outing. At 9 p.m., Azam took Salah to a corner store, getting him chocolate milk, chips, and assorted candies. Salah packed it all into his new Spider-Man backpack, which he insisted on keeping near him on the bed. He fell asleep cradling it. It was cold and raining hard in the morning. Azam had already left for work. Nancy stood at the window, wondering how she'd manage to wake Salah up and send him off in this weather. It was usually hard to get Salah out of bed. He'd stay under the sheets until the last possible moment. But this morning, he couldn't wait to get out the door. He wouldn't let Nancy put on warm leggings under his gray trousers. He was too excited for even a moment's delay. She wrapped a scarf around his jacket, and together they waited for the bus downstairs. Standing outside with Salah, Nancy felt torn. The weather seemed like anger from God, but Salah was so happy. Nancy gave him 5 shekels to spend at Kids Land. "Mama," he said, "I love you very much." Then he got on the bus.
Nathan, thank you for writing this book, for bringing to life the horror of what is taking place in Palestine. A Day in the Life of Abed Salama, Anatomy of a Jerusalem Tragedy. If you got the book, get another and give it to someone you care about or someone you disagree with. It is a very important book. Nathan, you have enthralled us all.